This week, the pursuit of creativity brought me to actor and content creator Claire Manship. In addition to being the mind behind all of CarFox's social media accounts, Claire has been acting in New York City for many years now. In part one of our two-part series with Claire, we'll be talking all things acting, what it's like acting in New York City, how the pandemic affected the theater industry, and how ultimately singing out of her window helped her launch her content creation career. My name is Ikey, and welcome to the Pursuit of Creativity podcast. Claire, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Ikey.
Absolutely. So there's a lot of questions I have. You have a very amazing and interesting backstory to your professional career. But before we jump into that, could you just give us kind of a breakdown of like who you are, your full name, where you live, and then what you currently do?
Okay. My name is Claire Manship. I'm 31 years old. I feel like it's like a dating profile. I live in Harlem, New York. So I've been in New York City since 2011. And I am currently the social media content manager at Carfax. So I run the TikTok, the Instagram, and the YouTube shorts over there. And I am still a working actor. So on occasion, I audition for Broadway shows and sing and dance.
Sing and dance. I love that. Okay, so those are all really creative things. And I want to kind of break up this interview, this conversation into two-ish halves, starting with your acting career. Because I think that is something like you're one of the first actors I knew and became friends with as an adult. And that's really cool to me. So if you could kind of walk us through like how you got started with acting, where you went to school for acting, and then like more so what you did with acting or what you're doing with acting in New York now.
Sure. Well, first off, I'm amazed that I'm one of the first actors you knew because you've been in New York a minute. I feel like they're crawling all over.
I guess I keep missing them.
Yeah. I said that like we were the infected in The Last of Us, like we're crawling all over. But really, we are. It's funny. So my first theatrical experience, I grew up taking ballet and eventually like in high school voice lessons and stuff. My first musical was You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown in the 7th grade. I played Marcy, which that role does not exist, but they give a role to every kid that auditions. So I got to be Marcy, and one of my classmates was Peppermint Patty. So we had like our own interstitial like scenes that they produced from the comic strip that didn't exist, which if you are in the copyright field, no, we didn't. And I grew up doing theater in school and like show choir, kind of anything singy and dancey that I could get my hands on. My brother, who was 3 years older than me, Kevin, who is still a musician and also very artistic. When I was in middle school, he was dating a stage manager at the high school level. And so I used to go on Saturdays to paint sets with them. Like I was like a little 12-year-old hired hand. Yeah. I used to like paint sets and, hang out and watch rehearsal and just thought it was like very, I don't know, aspirational to one, be a high schooler and two, to, I don't know, act for a living. I thought that was very cool. There's a joke in our business that we get paid to play pretend, and it's very real. Right. And I think it helps me stay connected to a sense of childhood. Like when I'm really having a good, rehearsal, I still think about those days, like visiting my brother in the high school auditorium, for his rehearsals for Fiddler on the Roof or whatever. And then when it came time to audition for colleges, I auditioned for kind of a lot of the top programs for music theater and ended up not getting in the places that I thought I would. My brother went to Elon and was a music theater major there. And I think in my like egotistical 17-year-old mind, I was like, well, I'm a legacy. Like, here I go. And I didn't get in. And I ended up going to a different school for one semester I re-auditioned for Elon. I really wanted to go because I got into some other conservatories that were like $60,000 a year, and my parents were like,
Right.
"LOL, no." Um, honestly, I mean, school's expensive, but theater school is
Yeah.
so expensive. Like, it really is cost prohibitive to many talented people. It's like
Mm.
part of the reason why we're trying to, this is a completely different conversation, but like destructure some of like the white patriarchy of theater because it's just
Hmm.
inaccessible to the average person, just
Yeah.
monetarily. And also, if you don't go to certain high schools or boarding schools, you don't get certain auditions, you don't go to these schools. It's insane. It's stupid. But at the time, it felt very important.
Absolutely.
um, yeah, yeah. So I re auditioned for Elon. I didn't get in again, but I was accepted academically. And I felt that I wasn't really being challenged at the school I was at before, in my classes, not necessarily in the theater program. So
Hmm.
I decided to transfer without a major declared, to Elon. And then on my second day of classes, I auditioned for the acting program and they accepted me in the room, which was
Hey, that's
bananas.
amazing.
Yeah, come on. So that was really, and then I really needed to eat a lot of humble pie. Like I really thought, can we curse on the show?
Sure.
I really thought I was the shit. Like I really already being knocked down a couple pegs by not getting into the music theater program when I was predominantly a singer,
Hmm.
um, was not enough to like really get me right sized. And so I obviously learned a lot in acting school, and a lot of skills that I still take with me, stage combat and dialect and
Sure.
sound
Yeah.
design and all sorts of cool stuff. But really, I needed to like humble myself because New York will eat you alive if you think you're good at all.
Yeah.
So yeah, so Elon has a like a winter term instead of a
Yeah.
Maymester. So
Okay.
I spent winter term, my senior year. I like had been up to New York and studied in the summer at a conservatory, but my first like big move was during senior sabbatical. Um, and I started auditioning for shows and had a musical booked before I even graduated.
Wow.
Um, yeah, that was crazy. But here's the joke, right? This is like non-union theater stuff. I worked 13
Hmm.
weeks for a $600 stipend at a Tony winning
13
theater.
weeks. Wow.
At a Tony winning theater.
I
Like
don't know. I'm not the biggest mathematician, but I feel like that doesn't really quite add up.
the math ain't mathing on that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, so hopefully that wasn't too long-winded, but that's really how I got, at least to New York.
No, that's such a good I think base for like further conversations about this acting realm, because I mean for me, I don't know a ton. I've learned a lot from you over the last year or so, but I'd love to hear more about like what it's like finding jobs in New York, because I think everyone probably has a friend or someone from their hometown that's like, I'm going to New York and I'm gonna make it. You're right. Like there's always that story, right? So like for someone that's done that, like what is it like auditioning and finding work in this realm?
It's so funny that people go to LA or New York and are like, I'm going to be a star. And then the next year they're on the CW and you're like, wow, you are so attractive. That is how that happened.
Ah,
Like,
yes.
it's not for a lack of talent. It's for a like, what is it? Like an embarrassment of riches in the beauty department.
Hmm.
For a lot of people. And I think that's why a lot of people can make the jump from modeling and stuff when they're like, I'm gonna be a star. But to move from the educational space, particularly in theater, is a lot of open calls. They used to call them cattle calls. I guess they're still called cattle calls,
Oh.
but we are not cows. Um,
Yeah. Not my favorite term.
oh yeah, I really don't like it. But yeah, so for years, I would get up every morning at 5 a.m. I would shower and do my hair as much as I could and take sometimes I did like half a beat of makeup. Sometimes I went naked face downtown. I'd go downtown. I would stand in the cold for hours. I would wait to audition. When I was non-union, it was so much harder. I wasn't seen one time, except
Wow.
on like a blizzard day. The first Broadway show I was ever seen for in New York was Mamma Mia. And the only reason they saw me was because the union members know their worth about safety and didn't go
They're
out
just
in the
like,
blizzard, but I did.
they're like, it's not going to happen for us, but Claire's here.
Yeah, yeah. So there were a lot of mornings like that, waiting around. And I remember another show that eventually went to Broadway, was called Natasha Pierre and the Great Comet of 1812. And I went to an open call audition. I happened to get seen. This was after I was in the union and kind of had a little bit more priority signing up for stuff.
Yeah.
And the people in the room, the auditors, asked me if I could come back in the afternoon for a callback to dance. And I had to go to my nannying job in the afternoon. I'm sure it's not any surprise to you or the audience that every actor has another job or five.
Yeah.
But mine was nannying. And I was like, I'm sorry. Like at the time I worked for a mom who was so mean to me. And I was like, I cannot lose my job right now. It's such a weird dichotomy for these side hustles where you're like, I really need this job. I cannot care enough about it for me not to be able to go do a show.
Right.
And so you're always kind of being pulled in two different directions. And I said to casting, I was like, I'm sorry, like I have to go to work this afternoon. They were like, oh, that's unfortunate. Okay. And then I felt like I had wasted both of our time. Like it was crazy. I get down into the subway and my friend Ashley, who auditioned in the same group as me, was like, hey, Claire, how'd it go? And I was like, oh, it was good. I got a call back, but I got to go pick up these kids for nannying. And she shook me by the shoulders and she said, we did not come here to be nannies. And lo and behold, I got the gumption to call out of work. And the mom was so mean to me. She was really angry.
Yeah.
And in the end, Ashley booked the show. She went to Broadway with The Great Comet of 1812. And so I think about that. Oh, I was like, wow, like she was a couple years older than me. She's a little more successful than me at the time. And I was like, oh my God, like that is going to be my like beacon of light for auditioning now. Like every time I get up early, I'm going to remember we did not come here to be nannies.
That's a great slogan. We did not come here to be nannies.
Yeah. Is that the name of app or?
Yes. Hey, well, maybe that's pretty good.
But yeah, so the auditioning was brutal, but there were a couple of like key kind of like cornerstone moments like that one with Ashley where it really puts the auditioning in perspective. I'm now at a place in my career where I really only audition for like television projects, for Broadway shows. That was a number of years, I guess almost 10 years ago now, that happened.
Yeah.
But now I kind of have the luxury of waiting for my agent to send me stuff. I don't have to, what we say, like pound the pavement as much. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Before we move on, could you just quickly give us a rundown of the difference between union and non-union for those who might not know in the audience, or the audience?
Sure.
There's no one here listening to the show.
I think there's an audience. I bet you have thousands of listeners by now.
That's exactly right.
That is exactly right. I'm manifesting it. Yeah, so there's a couple of different performance unions. We call them the 4As, like Alpha. So I'm in Actors Equity Association, which is the union that represents stage actors and stage managers. And the other 4As are, I'm sure you've heard of them, SAG-AFTRA, which is the Screen Actors Guild American Federation of Television and Radio Artists. AGVA, the American Guild of Variety Artists, which is like the Rockettes are AGVA.
Okay.
And like some circuses are AGVA. And AGMA, the American Guild of Musical Artists, is like the opera, like the Met operates under
Oh,
AGMA.
okay.
Yeah. So when you're in the union, you have the opportunity, at least in SAG and equity, we have the opportunity to earn work weeks for our benefits. And essentially, if you've ever seen
Oh,
Newsies, you know that if we are non-union, we have no protections at work. If we get injured, there's no workers' comp, there's no insurance, there's no breaks, right? Like
right.
it's basically born out of the like industrial revolution, and it's still kicking today. And many people will tell you, myself included, that the current state of union theater is in flux post pandemic.
Mm,
I mean, it's still
right.
a pandemic, but post reopening,
Yeah.
because we needed a lot of restructuring to feel safe on the job from the pandemic. But if there's no theater work afoot and happening to implement those practices and test them, then you just have to kind of implement new practices and
Mm-hmm.
jump right in. And it has been very stressful. Just a lot of restructuring, a lot of change, a lot of confusion over how to go back to auditions, how to go back to viewing theater, to rehearsing. You know, we sing in people's faces, we kiss
Right.
each other on stage. Like it's just there's no protection from COVID. And so that's kind of like the chief union concern right now that non-union companies just don't have to worry about. It's just you work at your own
Mm.
risk, truly.
Yeah. Wow. That is, well, thank you for that breakdown. That's actually super helpful and hopefully provides some good context to folks that are listening. But wow, yeah, that's intense out there, I would imagine. Is it, I'm guessing, like suggested to join a union, or like do people actively not join unions?
It's a little bit of both. It depends. I mean, in the theater, it used to be that you couldn't do union jobs without being a union member, but you couldn't join the union without earning union work weeks. So it was kind of this like vicious
Mm.
cycle. That has recently changed where different kind of verification for joining is now available, where we used to have these crazy joining requirements where we had to kind of jump all of these hurdles. There was a
Mm.
candidacy program. You had to earn weeks in internships and apprenticeships. That's how the $600 for 13 weeks of work happened.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
That makes
Yeah.
sense.
But now you can, at least with equity, you can verify that that you have been paid in a professional setting for a performing arts job, and you can join. You're eligible. But you still owe the initiation fees, the dues, etc. So for some people, they choose not to join the union because it's expensive. I mean,
Mm, yeah.
SAG is expensive. Like I think equity is expensive. SAG is bananas. Like to stay active on your SAG after membership, because they used to be two separate unions that
Oh,
merged, and now they
okay.
have double the dues.
Okay.
And yeah,
All right.
it's expensive. And that probably is the main reason that people don't join. It's cost
Hmm.
prohibitive. Um, or they have a relationship with a theater, or they live in a region where there aren't many unionized houses. And it's actually
Mm.
job prohibitive to them to join the union, because then they don't have anywhere to work.
Wow.
And
Yeah, that's
particularly
a
for
lot.
artists, they want to make art, you know?
Yeah. They don't have to
So,
want to worry about all this other stuff, but yeah, they kind of have to, right? Which is tough.
right, exactly.
Okay, let's shift gears just a little bit and talk
Okay.
about Bliss and how that also and the pandemic led to content creation. If you could just tell us about that story, which I've heard before, and it's a great. It is. I'm excited for people to hear about this situation.
Situation is the right word. The pandemic has put many new musicals in place into a situation, that is for sure. So basically, before Ikey and I met, I was working actor full time on a musical that was doing a pre-Broadway run. I put that, you can't see, but I put that in quotation marks because we often test shows out of town to make sure that they are viable to transfer to Broadway. And we test them in different cities that have very savvy audiences. One of the most kind of savvy and like new musical forward viewing audiences is in Seattle. And that's where we went to test the show. Other audiences like Frozen was tested in Denver. Beetlejuice was tested in Washington, D.C. Moulin Rouge was, I think, tested in Boston. So those are, they're creative and artistic hubs with audiences that are very similar to New York. They have a tourist, it's like 50% of the audience is from out of town and 50% are like curmudgeonly locals that have very strong arts opinions. And Seattle was so cool. So to rewind, I auditioned for Bliss, which is a new musical. It reimagines the concept of who can be a princess. So it is a body positive, racially integrated and diversified and, feminist, intelligence forward retelling of a princess story as opposed to the perfect Disney princess you may know.
Yeah.
So the story is a brand new musical, which is pretty rare these days. Oftentimes they are adapted from something else. They are jukebox musicals from, a popular band or singer. They're bio musicals or bio plays where they have a biographical spin based on that music or story. And so this show being from scratch, new music, story that never existed, team that had never worked together, for this particular production, decided to take the show to Seattle. I auditioned for it a couple years prior, and again, my ego, I was like certain I got it. Like they gave me a hug before I left the room. I was like, I'm amazing. So when I didn't book the development lab for the show where they basically test the music and, get it in front of producers for the first time, I was pleasantly surprised when they asked me to cover the role I auditioned for in the pre-Broadway run in Seattle. So that's how I ended up going out there. I was covering Katie Garrity, who is an incredible actor. She's currently on tour as Little Red and Into the Woods, so go see her in your town. But Katie's so wonderful, and I learned a lot shadowing that track and standing by for her, and I never went on. Mostly because she's a powerhouse and like probably could have, broken her leg and still given the best performance you've ever seen. Not that the union would encourage that, but yeah, it was like a huge opportunity and kind of learning experience for me, being basically the only person in the company that had no ties to Broadway prior. With, I don't know, maybe one or two exceptions. That might be too exaggerative, but so we were out there, and when we arrived, COVID had just broken out in Seattle, and Seattle was the first American city that had
first ones.
Confirmed cases. So they kind of told us, like keep to yourself, like kind of stay with the group, stay at the theater, try not to go to any clubs or anything where like it was kind of, it felt like a rumor, you know what I mean? Where it's kind of just petering about. That's not the right word, but you know what I mean. And a couple of people got sick while we were there with kind of like mystery illnesses, but the rest of us were fine, which makes me think it probably wasn't COVID and it was just Pacific Northwest winter. Which the PNW is unreal. I mean, it is like, it's like New Zealand up there. Oh, it's incredible.
It's wild.
The best time. I just loved it. And so we came back to New York. Our show closed like the third week of February, and we came back to New York, and I went back to my nannying job with a family that was very nice to me. I loved them. And the kids were about to go on spring break. And that was when the city started telling us, like, stop touching stuff. Don't go anywhere.
Yeah.
It was like February 10th, March 10th, I want to say. And the kids were like getting ready to go on spring break. And I remember feeling like something was ominous.
It was
And
very spooky in New York around that time.
oh,
Everyone was a little on edge.
and you're all looking at one another like, do you have it? Do I have it? Like,
Yeah.
and I remember the kind of last like actory thing I did. I went to an audition in Midtown on, I want to say March 11th. And there's a Starbucks. I don't know if it's still there, but there was a Starbucks at 39th and 8th Avenue. And that was kind of, it had like upstairs seating. So I used to like hang out there between auditions because I could kind of like be up off the street. And normally it's packed. It's like hard to get a seat there. And I went, I went up there and it is empty. It was so spooky. Oh yeah. And you can, there's like these railings that you can look down from the upstairs seating onto 8th Avenue. And I could tell something was wrong. And we started hearing about Broadway cancellations that night. So basically the goal was to move Bliss into a Broadway theater within a year or so after the Seattle run. But a year later, we were still shut down. Wow. Broadway went to reopen a couple of different times. And it kept getting pushed, and then shows would open, but the entire cast would get sick. The audience would be sick. There were super spreader reopening nights, and it just, the show, as much as we love it, just, I don't know, couldn't go on. That sounds so kind of cliche, but I actually don't think really my point of view has changed about the show must go on. I really don't think it should. in some cases, it's really not worth it. So, most recently, Bliss, I guess it was like the beginning of 2022, maybe 2021, they reworkshopped. And because I'm a standby, I'm not in the main cast, I wasn't needed. But they did ask me to join the cast album recording last summer, which was very cool. We recorded at Berkeley in Midtown, and there's just like a lot of history at Power Station, that recording studio at Berkeley, New York. And it just really was like, I don't know, it was just so nice to get back to those people, to that team, to the music. And I feel like I could go on, and I have gone on and on. I apologize. That's kind of the state of Bliss right now. And we're waiting to find out what the next step might be. I have heard through the grapevine that there are still plans to move it to Broadway, but much of our cast has moved on to other projects or left New York. A lot of them are attached to other shows that have funding and a theater on Broadway. So I really don't know, but I'm hopeful. Fingers crossed.
Hopeful. Yeah, no, that's good. And congrats on the album. I saw all those posts over the summer, which is super duper cool. And very exciting that you got to be a part of that. So shout out to you for that, for sure.
That was so fun. I hadn't been in the studio in like years, and I definitely never done a recording at that scale. It was really, really cool.
Yeah, that's so cool that they were able to put that all together and have you in there and stuff. That's like, I remember seeing, I was like, wow, this is really cool. It's cool stuff.
Well, and you know what was so gratifying was I was able to put a cast album on my resume for the first time, which was like, oh my God, like those are big dreams. Like during the shutdown, I had, and I guess this kind of like ties to the second half of your question, was that to stay creative, I was making TikToks, and I always thought that I would read my name for the first time in the theater section of the New York Times, and to read it in the style section about the TikToks I was making. Like it was just, it's so funny how the theatrical shutdown, like, opened so many creative, what do they say? Like a door shuts and a window opens.
Yeah, a window opens. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that is a Wonderful segue, because that is exactly what I love to talk about is you and Windows and social media. So for those who have no
So
idea what I'm referring to, Claire has many viral videos, amongst other viral videos of her singing out the window during the pandemic, which was great for the people, great for, I think, everyone benefited from that. So could you just talk us through a little bit of what was going on there, like all the details?
what was going on there? um, well, I wanted to be a star. So no, I'm just kidding. So I first sang at the window. So I had heard that there was like a campaign to get New Yorkers to sing the same song that was going to be played on like 5 different radio stations at the same time
Cool.
after the round of applause at 7 p.m. for
Right.
essential workers,
Mm-hmm.
for like the first responders. What did we call that? The
I don't know
citywide
if we
clap.
had a,
There we
yeah, 7 p.m. I remember we did that for a while.
Right. And so I had been alone at that point for a couple of weeks. My one roommate left and decided that she didn't owe us rent anymore and was just like, deuces.
Lame.
Lame. Yeah. And another roommate had gone downtown to be with her partner. So I was alone for a while. And then eventually that second roommate left New York. So then I was like alone for like
Wow.
15, 16 weeks. So this was like the very beginning of the true alone times.
Yeah.
I think of them as the alone times. And excuse me, I heard that they were going to do this like sing along after the citywide clap. And I was like, oh, I'd totally be down for that. And I have a boombox. I'll play it out the window. And the song they had chosen was New York, New York by Frank Sinatra.
Great song. Makes sense.
Great song. And so I turned on the radio after the clap. It was like 7:05. They started playing it. Da, 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 da. And everyone started closing their windows. And I was like, did you guys not hear about this incredible initiative? And I was so looking forward to it because I had been like so freaking lonely. And so I decided to, kind of sing along, just do my own thing. And I was still kind of like peeking my head out the window, like maybe there's someone there, like maybe someone else is doing it. And I started noticing that it was like my window in my bedroom faced out onto the back of the building. So it's not really an alley, but it's like the passageway between the two sides of the block. So you can't like walk the entire length of it, but it's essentially an alley. And I was noticing it was like echoing, because normally there's like vines and plants back there, but it's like the dead of winter in New York.
Right.
And yeah, I started like singing a little bit louder and I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. It's like an echo chamber. And then I decided the song was over. I turned off the boombox and I was like, oh, that was fun. I was like, you know what? I'm going to sing like a crazy person, like an absolute, I must have lost my mind for a moment because what New Yorker who doesn't have a death wish leans out the window to sing at the top of their lungs? I'm so grateful my neighbors were cool about this because you never know, like on a different block in the same neighborhood, it could be completely different. Like, who knows?
Totally.
Yeah. I mean, and some people really would like hate that, I'm sure, and I'm just grateful that like people were very kind. Yeah. So I leaned out the window and I sang New York, New York again. And I finished and like one person, like 10 buildings away was like, yeah, woo, like really tiny. And I was like, oh, that was nice. I like did something nice for that person. Okay. And then another voice in the opposite direction was like, do another. And I was like,
wow,
what? And they were like, yeah, another. And it's like a voice from above me. And I was like, oh my God, I was just like playing with echoes like a tiny child. And other people were like, really, I don't know, embrace that for like a minute and a half, whatever.
Hmm.
So then I think I sang the national anthem. I was like, what other song do I know all the words to right at this very moment?
Yeah.
The national anthem. And when I finished the national anthem, I mean, there must have been like 20 or 30 people applauding all of a sudden. It was like a lot of
Wow.
people came back to the window. So I sang at the window and like took requests and like sang for like first responders and police officers and firemen. And like, it was crazy. Basically every night for like 3 more months.
Wow. I didn't realize it was so long.
I stopped when we went out to march for Black Lives Matter. That was
Mm.
when I was like, you know what? It's not about me anymore. And it's time to, shut this down. So I kind of let it come to like a very clean end at one
Hmm.
point. I did come back a couple of times, like on the 4th of July, and I think on like Thanksgiving night later
Sure.
that year. But yeah, it was really, it's weird to look back on it and remember like, oh, that was me. Like I did
Yeah.
that.
Hmm.
And I would get messages from people who were like, I was listening to you on the radio in Tennessee this morning. Like I like,
Wow.
yeah, like people would be like, yeah, like we love you here in Brazil. And I'd be like, who? It was so flattering. It was so flattering. And then, in the way that these things do in moments of virality, I was very lucky to be reached out to by a number of publications and
Mm-hmm.
brands. And yeah, that's kind of how I started influencing, I guess. I don't know if I've
Influencing.
influenced anybody to buy
Oh no.
anything, but
I'm sure you have. I was gonna say, like, it's gotta be such a cool feeling to have done something so organically that impacted people far and wide, people literally around you during this crazy time, and apparently people all over the place. So just another shout out to you, because that is like really cool. And like, as I'm sure you know and feel the same way, music is so powerful. So it's cool that you're able
yeah.
to do that, and you got springboarded into doing other things from this cool thing.
That's true. Yeah. Thank you for that perspective. Cause sometimes I'm like, Claire, like no one wanted to listen to that. After a couple of weeks, there was one night I remember where I decided I was like, I'm just going to stay in tonight. Like, I'm not going to sing out
Hmm.
the window. It was like a Friday. My voice was kind of shot from all the other singing and just being alone, like in a pandemic, like doing puzzles and taking baths and like just,
Yeah.
not being warmed up. And people came to the window anyway and like shouted until I came to sing.
Wow.
It was crazy. And I would get these messages from people that were like, I really feel hopeless right now. Like someone I loved, like died of COVID last night, but I wake up in the morning and I check what song you sang because it's like the only thing keeping me going. I was like, oh my God, like, are you
Wow.
serious? God, it was insane. Like it was wild, but I ended up, like there were these incredible actor opportunities too. Like
Hmm.
I got a general with Disney. Like that was
Wow.
crazy. An audition I would have never gotten if I wasn't TikTok famous at the time.
Yeah.
Um, Not because I'm not good enough to do something with Disney. It's just, again, the inaccessibility of getting into these rooms. And
Totally.
TikTok really was like a door opener for me, a window opener,
A
as it
window, if you
were.
will.
So yeah, besides a couple of those, press and actory things, I did end up pivoting. Broadway wasn't opening, so
Right.
I had to pivot because unemployment was running out.
Thanks so much for listening to yet another episode of the Pursuit of Creativity podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and got some value from it, be sure to leave a like, comment, review, share it with someone that might enjoy it as well. It really helps us out. Be sure to come back next week for part 2 of this series with Claire. We'll be really digging into the ins and outs of what it was like transitioning into a content creation role, doing partnerships and sponsorships, and of ultimately working at TED with myself and landing the job at CarFox. Once again, I'm your host, Ikey, and as usual, stay optimistic. Better days are coming.